The galaxy, a sprawling web of interstellar empires and coalitions, has long existed in a fragile balance. For eons, ancient rivalries have simmered beneath the surface, held in check by the ever-present threat of mutual destruction. This cold peace, however, is not born of unity or cooperation but of fear. The major factions, each with their own ambitions and histories, constantly eye one another, waiting for the moment to strike. The technocrats are known for their mastery of advanced technology. Their worlds are shimmering with towering cities of metal and glass, their fleets bristling with weaponry no other species can replicate. Their society revolves around the worship of logic, data, and efficiency, making them cold and calculating in all aspects of life. Their influence extends across dozens of systems, and while they prefer to avoid direct conflict, they are more than capable of deploying devastating force when threatened. On the other side stands the Valerii Empire, a militaristic society built on conquest. The Valerii are driven by a deep-seated belief in their own superiority, viewing the galaxy as something to be subjugated. Their empire has grown vast through brutal campaigns of expansion, and their warriors are some of the most feared in the galaxy. The Valerii believe in honor through battle, and their massive fleets of warships constantly patrol the borders of their empire, ready to engage at a moment's notice. Then there is the Sin Collective, a loose coalition of smaller, weaker species who have banded together for survival. Individually, they are no match for the technocrats or the Valerii, but together, they present a formidable force. The Sin value cooperation and diversity, allowing member species to maintain their autonomy while pooling resources for mutual defense. Despite their unity, the Sin are often dismissed as disorganized and lacking the raw power of the larger factions. For centuries, these three powers have engaged in a delicate dance, avoiding open conflict but never fully trusting one another. Skirmishes flare up on occasion, proxy wars are fought in distant star systems, but full-scale war has always been avoided. Until now. At the edge of the galaxy, a discovery is made, an artifact of unimaginable power. Its origins are unknown, its true capabilities a mystery. But the rumors are enough to set the galaxy ablaze. The artifact, it is said, holds the potential to tip the balance of power in favor of whoever controls it. It could be a weapon, a source of limitless energy, or something even more dangerous. Whatever it is, the major factions see it as a prize worth fighting for. The technocrats, with their advanced knowledge, see the artifact as a key to unlocking new levels of technological superiority. The Valerii, ever hungry for conquest, view it as the ultimate tool for domination, a weapon that could crush their enemies once and for all. Even the Sin Collective, normally focused on defense and diplomacy, recognizes the artifact as something too valuable to ignore. If it falls into the hands of either of the other factions, it could spell the end of their fragile coalition. The scramble for control begins, and with it, the Cold War shatters into open conflict. Fleets are mobilized, armies are deployed, and across the galaxy, star systems once peaceful become battlegrounds. The artifact, located on a remote world far from the centers of power, becomes the focal point of this new war. Every faction converges on it, determined to seize it for themselves. Caught in the middle of this growing storm is humanity. Compared to the great powers of the galaxy, humanity is a fledgling race, only recently achieving faster-than-light travel. Their presence in the galaxy has been minimal, mostly confined to their own corner of space. The larger factions barely register their existence, viewing them as insignificant and unworthy of attention. But as the battle for the artifact intensifies, humanity is drawn into the conflict. Their homeworld, Earth, happens to lie near the path of one of the major battlefronts, and soon they find themselves in the crossfire. For the first time, humanity comes face to face with the full might of the galaxy's warring factions. At first, the larger civilizations dismiss humanity as a non-threat. Their ships are smaller, their technology primitive by galactic standards. To the technocrats and Valerii, humanity is little more than a minor nuisance, a species that will either be crushed or assimilated in the chaos of war. The Sin Collective, while more diplomatic, sees little hope for humanity's survival in this brutal new reality. However, humanity is not content to be mere bystanders. Faced with the destruction of their world, humanity's leaders quickly realize that neutrality is not an option. If they do nothing, their home will be swept away in the tides of war. If they fight, they risk annihilation by forces far beyond their understanding. Despite the overwhelming odds, humanity makes its decision. They will enter the war, not to conquer or dominate, but to protect their own and seek a way to end the conflict that now threatens their very existence. What follows is the beginning of humanity's transformation from an insignificant species to a key player in the Galactic War. Initially, their role is one of survival. Humanity fights to defend its borders, using every tactic at its disposal. Their early battles are a mix of desperation and ingenuity, with human commanders employing unorthodox strategies that catch their alien opponents off guard. While their technology may not be on par with the technocrats or Valerii, humanity's adaptability and creativity give them an edge that the larger factions had not anticipated. The more the galaxy watches humanity struggle and survive, the more they begin to take notice. What was once seen as a species on the brink of extinction now appears to be a growing threat. The larger factions, especially the Valerii, are slow to recognize the danger, but the smaller species in the Sin Collective begin to see humanity in a new light. The artifact, still at the heart of the conflict, continues to draw the attention of all factions. Its power remains a mystery, but its influence is undeniable. Each faction believes that if they can control the artifact, they will control the fate of the galaxy. For humanity, however, the artifact represents something far more dangerous. Their scientists begin to study the rumors surrounding it, and they come to a startling conclusion: if used incorrectly, the artifact could not only reshape the balance of power but also destroy entire civilizations. As humanity enters deeper into the conflict, their role begins to shift. They are no longer simply defending themselves. They are becoming mediators, negotiators, and strategists. Their fresh perspective, unburdened by the long-standing grudges and rivalries of the other factions, allows them to see solutions where others see only obstacles. They begin reaching out to smaller species, offering them alliances and protection in exchange for support. The galaxy, once divided by ancient conflicts, is beginning to change. And at the heart of this change is humanity, a species no one expected to make an impact. As the war over the artifact began to spread, humanity's initial response was one of caution. Earth, now home to a fledgling interstellar fleet, found itself suddenly thrust into the galactic stage. The first ships humanity had sent out into space were not warships, but a combination of exploration vessels, scientific outposts, and diplomatic envoys. Their mission had always been to peacefully explore the galaxy, not to get embroiled in a war between civilizations far more powerful than their own. Humanity's fleet was modest compared to the grand armadas of the technocrats, or the Valerii. It was primarily made up of multi-purpose ships, capable of both research and defense, but not specifically designed for large-scale warfare. Aboard these ships were a diverse crew of military personnel, scientists, engineers, and diplomats, each of them prepared to face the unknown, but none of them ready for the scale of conflict they were about to encounter. At first, humanity sought to stay neutral. Earth's leaders hoped to avoid being drawn into the violence, understanding that the factions vying for control of the artifact were far more advanced. They focused on defense, setting up observation posts to monitor the conflict and hoping to steer clear of the warring empires. But Earth's proximity to the artifact soon made neutrality impossible. It became clear that the planet's strategic location, close to vital space routes leading to the artifact, made it a target. It was only a matter of time before humanity's hand would be forced. The first confrontation came sooner than expected. A Valerii war fleet, on its way to secure the artifact, detected Earth's defenses and mistook them for hostile forces. Without warning, they launched a preemptive strike, bombarding human ships and colonies in the system. The resulting chaos was a brutal wake-up call for humanity. Their ships, while equipped with basic defenses, were not prepared for the full force of a Valerii assault. Casualties were high, and several outposts were destroyed in the initial attack. In the face of this overwhelming power, humanity was forced to rely on ingenuity and adaptability. Traditional military tactics would not work against an enemy so technologically superior, so human commanders turned to unconventional methods. They deployed guerrilla strategies, using the knowledge of their home territory to engage in hit-and-run tactics. Their smaller, faster ships navigated asteroid fields and space anomalies that the larger Valerii vessels struggled to maneuver through. Using their environment to their advantage, they inflicted surprising damage on the Valerii fleet, even managing to force a temporary retreat. The battle marked a turning point. Humanity, though clearly outmatched, had shown that it could not be easily crushed. The alien factions, particularly the smaller ones within the Sin Collective, began to take notice. Despite suffering significant losses, humanity's resilience earned them a level of respect they had not anticipated. The Sin Collective, in particular, saw in humanity a kindred spirit, another underdog fighting to survive in a galaxy dominated by larger powers. Realizing the gravity of the situation, humanity's leaders convened a war council. It became clear that simply defending Earth would not be enough. The war over the artifact threatened not only the planet but the entire solar system. If they did nothing, they would eventually be overrun. In the midst of this crisis, humanity made a bold decision: they would not remain passive. They would enter the war, not just to defend themselves, but to actively seek peace. The decision was not made lightly. Humanity had no interest in galactic domination, but the realization that the artifact could destroy the fragile balance between the factions prompted them to act. Their mission was clear: they would attempt to mediate the conflict, and if possible, prevent the artifact from falling into the hands of any one faction. Humanity's leaders saw an opportunity to position themselves as peacekeepers, not conquerors, in a galaxy consumed by chaos. Diplomacy became humanity's primary weapon. They began reaching out to smaller factions within the Sin Collective, offering alliances based on mutual survival. The message was simple: humanity had no intention of seizing the artifact for themselves. Instead, they proposed that the artifact's power should be shared equally among the factions, with neutral oversight to ensure no single empire could use it as a weapon of domination. This offer resonated with the smaller species, who had long feared being crushed by the technocrats or Valerii. Slowly, these smaller factions began to see humanity not as a minor player but as a potential ally. While the larger factions dismissed humanity's attempts at diplomacy, cracks began to form in their coalitions. The technocrats, who had always prided themselves on their superior logic and technology, were surprised by humanity's rapid adaptation and tactical creativity. Meanwhile, the Valerii, who believed in brute strength, started to view humanity's unconventional strategies as a nuisance they could no longer ignore. Humanity's position as a mediator grew stronger as the war dragged on. Their diplomats, working tirelessly behind the scenes, convinced several key species to form a new coalition, one based on cooperation rather than conquest. The goal was not to defeat the larger factions but to present a united front that could force them to the negotiating table. Humanity's strategy was clear: if they could tip the balance of power by rallying the smaller factions, they could bring an end to the war without further destruction. While diplomacy played a central role, humanity's military forces continued to engage in strategic battles. They focused on defending key systems and using their growing alliances to disrupt the supply lines and communications of the larger factions. Each victory, however small, served to bolster their position in the galaxy. The more victories they secured, the more species began to believe that peace was possible through unity rather than endless war. Humanity's adaptability was their greatest strength. Unlike the larger factions, who were bound by tradition and rigid military doctrines, humanity had no established playbook. This flexibility allowed them to approach the conflict with fresh eyes, constantly shifting their strategies to keep their enemies off balance. Their creativity, combined with their willingness to embrace diplomacy, made them a force to be reckoned with, despite their relatively small size. As the war raged on, the larger factions continued to underestimate humanity at their peril. The Valerii, in particular, remained fixated on the idea that brute force would eventually crush any resistance. But humanity's resilience, combined with their growing list of allies, slowly began to turn the tide. The technocrats, for all their technological prowess, found themselves struggling to maintain their grip on the conflict as smaller factions defected to humanity's side. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was at the center of that change. What had started as a desperate fight for survival had evolved into something much larger. Humanity was no longer just defending itself, it was shaping the future of the galaxy. The war over the artifact had forced humanity to adapt, to grow, and to take on a role no one had expected. The larger factions could no longer ignore them. Humanity had entered the war, and the galaxy would never be the same. As humanity continued to evolve its role in the Galactic War, their efforts to mediate between the warring factions became increasingly significant. Recognizing that they couldn't match the sheer military power of the technocrats or the Valerii head-on, they leaned heavily into diplomacy, reaching out to species that had long been marginalized by the larger empires. These smaller factions, having been crushed under the weight of the larger factions' dominance for centuries, were looking for any opportunity to change their fate. Humanity provided that chance. The early stages of alliance building were difficult. Many of the smaller factions were skeptical, having seen countless wars start with promises of unity only to end in domination by a more powerful player. Humanity, however, had a unique message. They saw balance, not control. They framed their approach around the idea of fairness, offering an alternative to the endless cycle of conquest and retaliation that had defined the galaxy for millennia. This resonated with several key factions within the Sin Collective, who saw humanity's rise as a potential means of survival. With these early alliances in place, humanity began to gain a foothold in the war. These new allies, though individually weaker, brought valuable resources, knowledge of local territories, and tactical support. Together, they started to challenge the larger factions in unexpected ways. Humanity's position was strengthened by their ability to listen to the concerns of these smaller species, ensuring that they had a voice in the coalition and were not merely being used as pawns. As alliances grew, so did humanity's influence on the battlefield. Their approach was a delicate mix of diplomacy and military intervention. Where possible, they brokered ceasefires and peace agreements between smaller factions. When diplomacy failed, they used precision strikes and guerrilla tactics to weaken the grip of the larger empires. The flexibility of this approach allowed humanity to be unpredictable, always staying one step ahead of their adversaries. What made humanity particularly dangerous to the larger factions was their refusal to follow the traditional rules of war. The technocrats and Valerii, steeped in centuries-old doctrines, relied on overwhelming force and strict hierarchies. Humanity, on the other hand, adapted constantly, employing tactics that the larger factions were unprepared to counter. Their willingness to think outside the conventional strategies not only gave them an edge in battle but also began to shift the perception of their role in the war. The galaxy was beginning to take notice. What had started as a war over control of the artifact was slowly transforming into a war over the future of the galaxy itself. The technocrats and Valerii, once dismissive of humanity, now viewed them as a growing threat to their dominance. The very existence of humanity's alliances threatened the status quo that had kept the galaxy divided for so long. Meanwhile, humanity's scientists had been studying the artifact itself, attempting to understand the true nature of its power. The artifact, as it turned out, was far more complex than any of the factions had anticipated. It wasn't just a weapon or a source of energy. It was something far greater, with the potential to either unite or destroy the galaxy depending on how it was used. This discovery added a new layer to humanity's role in the conflict. While the larger factions still viewed the artifact as a prize to be seized, humanity proposed a different solution. The artifact should be used as a tool for peace. Rather than allowing it to fall into the hands of any single faction, humanity suggested that its power be shared equally, with a council made up of representatives from all factions overseeing its use. This proposal was radical and met with skepticism, but it was the first time anyone had suggested using the artifact to maintain balance rather than domination. Humanity's proposal drew both praise and resistance. Some of the smaller factions saw it as the only viable path to peace, while others remained wary, fearing that even with a council in place, one faction might still find a way to seize control. The larger factions, particularly the Valerii, viewed humanity's proposal as an insult. They had no interest in sharing power and saw the idea of a council as a direct threat to their authority. In response, elements within the Valerii and technocrats began plotting against humanity, realizing that their growing influence could no longer be ignored. Covert attacks and betrayals became common. Several key human diplomats were assassinated, and sabotage within the coalition began to destabilize the alliances humanity had worked so hard to build. The larger factions hoped that by undermining humanity from within, they could force them back into a defensive position. Despite these setbacks, humanity pressed on. They were acutely aware that the path to peace was fraught with danger, and they prepared themselves for the betrayals they knew were inevitable. Their response to these attacks was measured. Rather than retaliating with brute force, humanity used these moments to further strengthen their diplomatic efforts, showing the smaller factions that they were committed to peace, even in the face of adversity. The more humanity persisted, the more their role in the war shifted from that of a minor player to a central mediator. Their military, though still far smaller than those of the technocrats or Valerii, had become highly effective, specializing in precision strikes and defensive operations that minimized casualties. Meanwhile, their diplomats continued to broker new alliances, each one adding to the growing coalition that now spanned multiple star systems. But humanity's greatest strength was not their military or their diplomacy, it was their vision for a unified galaxy. The larger factions were still focused on winning the war, but humanity had shifted the conversation to what would come after the war. Their message was clear: if the conflict continued as it had for millennia, the galaxy would remain trapped in an endless cycle of violence. But if the artifact could be used to unite the factions, there was a chance for lasting peace. Humanity's proposal for a shared council to oversee the artifact gained traction among several key factions within the Sin Collective. These species, having suffered under the control of the larger factions for centuries, saw in humanity a chance to break free of that cycle. They began to publicly support humanity's vision, lending their voices to calls for a ceasefire and a diplomatic solution. Still, the path ahead was treacherous. The larger factions, particularly the Valerii, were unwilling to relinquish their pursuit of dominance. Covert operations against humanity continued, with spies and saboteurs attempting to fracture the coalition from within. But humanity had anticipated this resistance, and had put in place countermeasures to protect their growing network of alliances. Even as betrayal loomed, humanity remained committed to their goal. They knew that the future of the galaxy depended on their ability to mediate the conflict, to bring together factions that had been at odds for centuries, and to convince them that peace was possible. Their vision of using the artifact as a tool for balance, rather than conquest, was beginning to resonate across the galaxy. Despite the resistance, humanity was turning the tide, one alliance at a time. The war for control of the artifact reached its boiling point as the larger factions prepared for one final, decisive strike. The technocrats, with their unmatched technological might, and the Valerii, driven by their thirst for domination, both saw this moment as their last chance to seize the ultimate prize. The galaxy's focus converged on the artifact, now surrounded by forces from all sides. It was clear to everyone involved that this battle would determine the future of the galaxy. Humanity, having built a coalition of smaller factions, prepared for what they knew would be their most difficult challenge yet. Their allies, though fiercely loyal, were still outnumbered and outgunned by the combined forces of the technocrats and the Valerii. But humanity had learned throughout the war that sheer power wasn't the only path to victory. As the larger factions mobilized for their final push, humanity employed a strategy that combined both military tactics and diplomatic maneuvering, aiming to create enough pressure to force a ceasefire. The battle itself was fierce. The technocrats unleashed waves of drone fleets and automated weaponry, overwhelming in their precision and coordination. The Valerii, true to their militaristic nature, led brutal assaults, using their vast armies and heavy warships to batter their way toward the artifact. Yet humanity and its allies didn't back down. Their smaller, more nimble forces engaged in hit-and-run tactics, striking vulnerable points and exploiting weaknesses in the enemy formations. The key to their success wasn't in overpowering the enemy, but in delaying them long enough to push their diplomatic efforts. Throughout the battle, humanity's diplomats worked behind the scenes, communicating with key factions within both the Technocrat and Valerii empires. Many within these factions had grown weary of the war, recognizing that the cost of victory, if it came, would be staggering. Humanity's message to them was simple: continuing the fight would lead to destruction, not just of their enemies, but of themselves. They presented a solution: peace through negotiation, a shared future in which the artifact's power could benefit all rather than just one. At the heart of humanity's plan was a gamble, one that risked everything. Humanity's leaders proposed that if the fighting continued and no peace could be achieved, they would destroy the artifact. The weapon that everyone sought, the object that had driven the galaxy into chaos, would be obliterated rather than fall into the wrong hands. This ultimatum sent shockwaves through the ranks of the larger factions. For so long, the artifact had been seen as the ultimate prize, but now they were being forced to consider the very real possibility of losing it altogether. Humanity's gamble was based on a deep understanding of the motivations driving the larger factions. While the Technocrats and Valerii were willing to fight for control of the artifact, they were not willing to see it destroyed. The risk of total loss outweighed the potential gains, and this realization began to sink in among the leaders of both factions. As the battle raged on, the threat of losing the artifact forever forced key figures within the Technocrat and Valerii command to reconsider their strategies. In the final moments of the battle, as the larger factions pushed closer to the artifact, humanity's message began to resonate. Negotiations, though tenuous at first, started to gain traction. The leaders of the Technocrats and Valerii, seeing the very real possibility that the artifact would be destroyed, agreed to a ceasefire. The fighting slowed, and the galaxy held its breath. For the first time since the war began, there was hope that a peaceful resolution could be reached. The gamble had paid off. Rather than continuing the cycle of violence, the factions agreed to meet and discuss terms. The artifact, once the source of so much conflict, would not be claimed by any one empire. Instead, it would be placed under the control of a neutral council made up of representatives from all major factions. Humanity, having played the key role in brokering the peace, was granted a primary position on this council. The artifact, now recognized as too powerful for any one species to control, would be used to maintain balance and ensure that the galaxy would not fall into another war. In the aftermath of the battle, a peace treaty was signed. It was a fragile peace, one that would require constant vigilance to maintain, but it was a peace nonetheless. The galaxy, once divided by ancient rivalries and conflict, now stood at the brink of a new era. Humanity, once dismissed as insignificant by the larger factions, had risen to become a respected power. Their ability to adapt, their creativity in both warfare and diplomacy, and their unwavering commitment to peace had reshaped the course of galactic history. With the war over, humanity's roles shifted once again. They were no longer just defenders of their world or mediators of conflict. They had become peacekeepers. The Neutral Council, established to oversee the artifact and maintain galactic order, relied heavily on humanity's ability to navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries that still existed. The artifact, no longer a symbol of war, became a tool for unity, a reminder of the fragile peace that had been forged through negotiation and compromise. Humanity's legacy was cemented not just in the treaties they helped create, but in the values they brought to the galaxy. Their adaptability had allowed them to survive in a war where they were initially outmatched. Their creativity had enabled them to find solutions where others saw only conflict. And their desire for peace, even in the face of overwhelming odds, had shown the galaxy that a different path was possible. But while the war was over, the future remained uncertain. The peace that had been achieved was fragile, and the galaxy, still scarred by years of conflict, would take time to heal. Humanity's role as a mediator and peacekeeper would continue to evolve, as new challenges arose and new threats emerged. The artifact, though no longer a weapon of war, still held immense power, and its potential to reshape the galaxy remained ever present. The story of humanity's rise in the galaxy was not one of conquest or domination. It was a story of survival, of resilience, and of hope. The galaxy, once shuddering under the weight of endless war, now stood on the edge of a new beginning, and at the heart of this new era was humanity, a species once seen as insignificant, now a symbol of what could be achieved through unity and determination. The future, though uncertain, was one that humanity had helped to create. Their legacy, forged in the fires of war and tempered by the desire for peace, would continue to shape the galaxy for generations to come. The galaxy, once divided, now stood together, and humanity's place in it was forever secured.